I would not rule anything out with the Deshaun Watson situation at all. A settlement would probably accelerate things, cause everyone to declare what they actually want to do.
Like, I speculate, probably go buy Bitcoin, focus on that.
It doesn't really matter what round he's drafted in, where he comes from, or how he gets here. It's about what you do when you're here. And you don't really know it until you actually see it and they actually get here, right? And again, once you kind of get into that, 5th, 6th, 7th round, I mean, you could probably lump 5th to free agents, undrafted free agents in the same bucket. So hopefully there's enough players to get you to the end point. There's probably going to be some good players that weren't drafted. I mean, it happens all the time.
And welcome to another episode of the Turn Up for What podcast, talking your Houston Texans straight from the Great British Isles. And it's draft week. Perhaps the first chance the Texans have got to turn the page into the new Nick Caserio era with 8 picks slated. What's the best we can hope for? Well, I think it's been telling in some of Caserio's comments that he saw the 5th round onwards to the undrafted free agents, all of a similar talent pool. He talked about them being 50-50 prop bets, and it's hard to disagree with him in that sense. But I think there's definitely a lot to look forward to. I think it's a relief from non-football issues that have surrounded this team all off season, and you kind of get to walk in a bit of the light of football and what it should be about, really. So that I think from that point of view, it's a bit of escapism, and we can hopefully find some gems, and it gives every team hope. Albeit having picked 67 onwards, that hope has reduced slightly, but there is hope for the Texans to start to turn the page and bring in new positions. Now, I think apart from the 2 tackle spots, over-invested in Charlie Eck, 4th round pick last year, didn't play. Bring back Rod Johnson. It wouldn't make sense to bring a tackle in unless you're going to trade one of those guys out that you've got for some capital in return. And looking at the restructure Tunsil's contract, that's not really going to yield any great return. I think you're kind of saddled with that. Titus Howard potentially, but then again, he's unproven, never played a full season. So you've got to think that position is one that they are least likely to draft it unless a player falls to them that is too good to pass up, and they'll have to just take him there and then. So they can go anyway. I think this roster is so threadbare of genuine starter caliber talent, despite all the players that Caserio's brought in, 3 to 7 year experienced guys. Most of them journeymen. Most of them aren't really going to change the dynamic of your football team, bar perhaps Philip Lindsay, Desmond King, and Shaq Lawson. I think all those guys have got a chance to be, semi-decent starter impacts type players, but the rest are all up for grabs. And I think any position the Texans can find across the roster on either side of the ball has got to be welcomed. And I think it'll be interesting to see how Nick plays the draft and how he plays the board. And of course, a lot of it is how it falls to you and what players go ahead of you and how you rate players for your scheme and system, etc., versus other players. But I think based on what we've seen, he will move around the board. I can't see him just sitting at those 8 picks and just letting the board fall. And I think I put out a tweet today as an example of kind of the moves that I thought he could make. And I'll talk you through that. So I think if, just say for example, there's a corner or an edge rusher, a front 7 player that falls to the back of the second round. Houston aren't on the clock till 67. Say we're getting into the mid to high 50 picks there. In this scenario, they could trade up, give up 67, and 2 of their 3 picks in the 6th round. Give 2 of those up to go and get a guy who's, they may have a late first, early second round grade on, and go and get that guy and fill a need. So that there's an aggressive move to step up and tackle a player. Because I think of the 8 picks, I don't expect the Texans to take 8 picks, predominantly because they're in the latter half of the round, based on the comment Nick Caserio made about fifth round onwards. So I think there's a lot of room to manoeuvre upwards and slightly downwards to a point to get value, but I don't expect the Texans to have drafted 8 players, considering the amount of guys they've got on the roster just now, considering the value that can be found. Not always, but it certainly does turn up once every few years for each franchise, an undrafted guy that can come in at a cheap deal and potentially take a roster spot and be here to be groomed and developed. So then by making that first move up into the second, the Texans would trade back out of the 109th, move later into the 4th round and give an extra, and then pick up an extra 5th and 7th from the team that are moving up to the top of the 4th. The Texans would then take that pick. It's just kind of best player available at that point. And then they would slide back down a bit. And you see a couple of guys there that are falling, that are, that they've got sort of mid to late second round grades on. In the 4th round, there's a gluttony of talent at certain positions. In this example, say it's wide receiver. The Texans could easily then give up their 2 5ths and a 7th to get back into the back end, sort of mid to late 4th round. You'd take 2 guys in the 4th round in total. So by doing that, I think that's an opportunity to pick up 3 guys who are more than capable of starting this season. And then that would then give you the 5th gain. You could pick that up and just take BPA at that point. You've still got one of your 6 there left and a 7th. So you walk home with 6 picks over the day, but only one of them that was one of the picks that you actually started the day with. And I expect to see Caserio operate like that, and we'll see how he does. He may well just sit there, Brian Gaines-esque, and just let it all fall and take the pick there. But I expect him to move around, and hopefully he can make it a bit of an interesting pick. And we've gone through a lot of names in the last 3 weeks in terms of guys you can look for, but generally this team can go any pick in any direction, and more than likely will improve the football team. I don't think Deshaun gets traded this week. It seemed, minimalistic chance at best. I think this legal process will continue to play out, and he'll be a Texan, perhaps on the commissioner's exempt list, perhaps on a holdout, and we'll not see Deshaun for this season, I wouldn't think. If they do settle, as we said in the intro, the clip from Ian Rappaport, then that allows the things to move on. But until that settlement comes, then I think that'll be a while. If Deshaun's side are dug in, and I wrote an article on podcasttexans.com last week about how Deshaun had been ill-advised, and if his team and in his advisory group are dug in wanting to prove these allegations to be false, then this could go on for a number of years. But then I think the question is, right, okay, you want to hold, and you want to make sure you're principled in your stance, and you don't want to be defeated in that stance. But I think subsequently that's going to have a knock-on effect on his suspension of the league, and how long do they wait to wield that axe, and holding out to be proven not guilty, if that's your belief, in court might not be the viable option, regardless of the evidence, regardless of the beliefs. That maybe not just a feasible option for them to take. So I think they probably have to be smarter in that, and finding all the evidence. It's gone back and forth, all played out in the court of public opinion. And Rusty Hardin's obviously come in at a later stage, because I think he was ill-advised, and he showed that email that came out, that his agency, Athletes First, had the chance to tackle this proactively at a very early stage and chose not to. So there's definitely a lot of room for manoeuvre of this situation to go incredibly worse than it already has. And also, could they put a lid on it and move on in a footballing sense if they can come to a conclusion and agreement with all parties via the Harris County Court legal structure in a civil case. So that continues to go. So I don't think we'll see any movement on that. That story may bob its head up and down, but certainly any momentum. There was a list of 8 teams that were all supposedly interested at one point. Most of that interest has been muted, or those teams have decided to move on in other ways. Then this story probably is not going away, but we'll see where it ends up in the coming days. But that being said, I do think for Nick Caserio's own sanity. He's probably going to have one real go at this as a general manager. Then, is there a way they can use this situation to try and drive a bit of a wedge between Watson and his ill-advised thoughts of the agency, and make that point that they could then use his platform, their custodians of the city of Houston, and could they then allow him as a Houston Tex move forward, so as a platform for rehabilitation, to devote time and effort to some of the causes directly, or the charities directly related to some of the issues that he's been alleged with to have done wrongdoing towards, then there's an opportunity for that, taking that longer term view of this football team, because the medium to long term view of this football team with Deshaun Watson is far better than the one without. And if the McNairs can't see that, if Caserio isn't able to convince them of that, regardless of all this off-season stuff, once that's settled, I think there needs to be one last roll of the dice for the team to try and get the guy who's done wrong in this city, he's done wrong to the name of the club, to the name of the fan base, and of course to all these victims, again, allegedly. But whether it's true or not, every single allegation, the point is he's distracted, he's taken his attention, he's taken the club's attention, and the club's ability to move on, regarding trade requests aside, he's taken that ability away to move on and try and rebuild this football team. And it had to do that this off-season after a 4-win disastrous year, change of coach. And they would not be simply not being able to do that. They couldn't move on. He wanted out, and then this came down like a ton of bricks. Is stifled any momentum this team could have had to try and fix their issues this off-season. So it's all been a bit of a sorry mess, but the draft does present a really viable platform to move forward and bring in some new players, some new storylines. Good luck trying to remember this roster on game day by the time pre-season rolls around in August, but it's going to be a huge level of turnover, and looking like there'll only be 2 players left for the 2017 draft. Zach Cunningham probably going to be the only one that's on the field by the time games are actually played, but it's certainly a huge change of the wind, a change of the guard for this Houston Texans team and everything as we know it, and that really starts on Friday night from pick 67 most likely, providing they don't trade up, and it kind of starts there. So exciting times in that sense. There's a couple of rule changes again this announced by the league. And the replay ref, I think, is a positive move. I think if you remember the non-call pass interference with DeAndre Hopkins in Baltimore in 2019, okay, the Texans weren't at the races, but big decisions at certain points of the game can go against teams and change the course of games. May not change the end result, but change the course of games in a dramatic fashion, and certainly that call did that. So with all the technology, with all the camera angles, with all the assets available to the refereeing queue, having that extra guy in the booth, I think, is a huge positive for the league, and hopefully that'll mean some fairer calls, and things just won't get missed. And I think it's a good resource with the technologies there, so why not use it? The onside kick adjustment, again, all kind of safety process in the setup box, so many guys per one side. I mean, the special teams rule changes continue to dwindle that part of the game, and it certainly won't make much of a difference, I don't think. But that part of the game, kickoff returns are almost completely negated now, and I think it's certainly something that the league will want to rule out, and that's just another step towards that. The jersey numbers is one I don't personally like. I think when you watch the college game, when you're trying to identify players, when you're trying to identify formations, when you see a guy with number 7 on defense, and you wonder, you think, who's that guy? Where does he come from? What position? I know it's very fashionable. I know players like it. But for me, I understand what Tom Brady said, because if you're a quarterback trying to set up the formation, make the checks at the line, different numbers and different formations is certainly going to be more difficult to try and assign and make sure the blocking, make sure the coverage is right for depending on who's lined up along the line. So I think it's something that in the real grand scale of it, seems like a very small issue, but certainly in terms of for the traditionalists, in terms of understanding the field in detail and who's in what position and how your offense lines up against the other defensive personnel, and I think that may cause some issues and make some mistakes, and I think as players simply won't be used to it. It's certainly something that probably could have done without. I don't think it adds anything greatly. So all players that move on from their number have a financial commitment to the league, and the league are protecting its fan base in that sense. If you move on from the position, then I think the player may well be bound or have some financial commitment towards that, the inventory of those jerseys. So the league never missing a trick and reminding you it's a business first and foremost. I think the call on taunting, again, it'll be it's probably got a bit loose, and then the blocking, I think, below the waist as well, which hasn't come in yet, but certainly they're trying to get tighter on. Effectively eradicated shot blocks in the last couple of years. Another step towards that, again under the banner of safety, which is understandable, but they're certainly looking to take away blocking, and it'll change the way linemen block at the line of scrimmage and in the run game, and another tweak that players will have to adjust to. So for a league that managed to affect what, in turn, what could actually be deemed a catch, continues to make some for the good under safety, but some other decisions that are perhaps questionable in terms of the product. And as the NFL continues to make this product an all year round deal, the draft is one of the centerpieces of its calendar, and obviously the Texans not picking until 67. There's a lot of glamour and a lot of interesting storylines, non-Houston wise. I suppose we probably better get used to that notion, but there's certainly a lot of guys to be picked up before the Texans are on the clock. But who goes first in the wide receiver ranks? Is it Jamar Chase, perhaps the most talented, or is speed still valued by clubs as we saw last year? Jalen Waddle potentially going. You think a guy like Kadarius Toney's going to go in the first round, just a gadget, pure athlete, going to make things happen on the offensive side of the ball. Who's the first cornerback going? Is it Surtain or is it JC Horn? Horn, I think, maybe got potential upside. Surtain seems to be the more smoother rounded athlete, so it's interesting in that sense. Is Penei Sanu, is he going to be the consensus number one? Is Rashawn Slater in Northwestern, as that program continues to get more and more clout with their coach Fitzpatrick? Is there something there that will continue to see more players taken high from that program? Greg Newsome as well being the other cornerback, most likely to be the fourth one off the board, and I think going to be in the first round. Will there be any running backs taken? I think that's a big question that people are looking for in that sense. Potentially not as well. Trevor Lawrence at 1, and you've got to think it will be Zach Wilson at 2, and therefore after all that is still to be defined, but certainly there'll be some general football intrigue as the Texans watch on, and you just got to hope certain positions like tackle and things like that can push good guys down into the third round, and it's not without the realms of possibility, but certainly a show in Cleveland to be had, and looking forward to seeing by the time the Texans are on the clock on the second half of day 2 on Friday, then what are the players left on that options? And there's 101 ways that they could go. Decipher over this weekend, and it will be interesting to see if there are any teams that will trade players and how amenable they are to that when the uncertainty of the cap going into next year, and just quite how that will come back, and how revenues will be affected by fans in the stadium. It's all systems go as far as the league are concerned, but it's still got a lot to play out. As you've seen, you can't take anything for granted. I think in COVID times a lot is changeable, so I think teams may have some, or some others may have some more certainty about making those moves. We haven't seen a huge amount of trades. Obviously, Trent Williams one last year was probably the most notable one. Josh Rosen the year prior. So there may be some storylines like that. Perhaps the Texans could be involved in those. I wouldn't rule out Nick making any moves that he think has a chance to make the team better. I think this off-season we'll probably not see the same level of moves into the further seasons, but certainly the volume will continue to be high against the league average, and we'll start to see more than 30 to 40% of this roster continue to turn over, and we'll have in the region of 8 players new plus a smaller class of undrafted free agents, but certainly a different approach and a different way of doing of running this front office from the GM. And I'm still very critical of the amount of money that Caserio spent and the amount of money that he's kicked into future years with these contracts, and I think that may harm us and that may cause more damage than good. Just effectively trial players who can come in and test out if they have a future in the league as a role player, a special teamer, or what have you. But ultimately, if these guys perform 1 year deals, you're going to have to pay them more to bring them back anyway. So why do it on such scale? I understand the 1 and 2 year deals, short-term investments, low risk. But actually, a lot of these guys aren't really high reward because they're a reason why their base price is so low and why you can bring so many. I think I understand the premise, but doing so many on such a scale at a high volume has a financial impact when you're trying to fit under a salary cap. But look, I think Caserio's come across as a smart guy, very organised. Now, this is the first real test for him as a GM. This is GM season where they show and mark their legacy in 10 years at ball clubs, and the draft is what builds a roster. Not free agency, but how you build a sustainable roster is through the draft. And ultimately, you want to draft your own guys, develop them, and pay them and keep them in-house. The Texans have effectively started from a base of zero, so any player that can come in and do something is a benefit, and that's just where we are right now as a ball club, and that's the reality of it. But looking forward to the draft. Hopefully, if you got any thoughts and you're out there watching on over the weekend, then do get in touch, or social media on Instagram, on Facebook, on Twitter, and make sure we're understanding. It's going to be a long old season, I think, this year, so please do reach out. Any thoughts you got, any comments while you're watching it. Great to hear from you. Thank you very much again for listening. This off season feels like the first step in, so we'll be coming back after the draft to talk about the picks where we've got, and then the week following will be the schedule release, so keep coming thick and fast. We may take some weeks off over this off season, but certainly each week as we go by continues to have a fair bit for us to get into. But just a small couple of words here, 20 minutes prior to the draft this week. I'm looking forward to seeing what Caserio turns up. But thanks again for listening. Please check out the latest 2 articles on free agency, on Caserio, on the whole Watson situation, the origins of social media, and how that's implemented in that generation that Deshaun's part of. I suggest you read that and check that out, and how that will all be remembered once it's said and done. But thanks again for listening. Please check us out at podcasttexans.com, on Facebook, on Twitter, and also on the interesting world of NFL Texans on Instagram. But thanks again, and we'll be speaking to you straight after the draft is finished next Tuesday.